You're listening to the Mezzo Guild podcast.
بس أنا لازم أحسه الأول عشان أقوله.
아직 나의 어색한 한국말이 짤따рат하고 지적하진 말아주세요.
Я хочу с тобой серьезно поговорить.
Really good news, Farragut. No, I can quit this Moldina, so here, sure.
Language learning made simple. Every language that you learn after your second language gets easier than the one you learned previously, the one you learned before it. In other words, every time you learn a new language, it's easier than the last one. Now, you've probably heard other people say that before. And if you've learned a few languages yourself, then you will no doubt agree with me that as you become a more experienced language learner over time, the whole process of learning a new language actually starts to get easier. And this is especially true of languages that are a part of the same family. So, for example, if you're going from Italian to Spanish to French, you will find that gets much, much easier each time. And to use a comparison, a similar comparison, if you're a computer geek like me, going from Italian to Spanish is kind of like going from C to C++ or Java to C. You've covered all of the foundational stuff, and really it's just a matter of learning a new syntax. And in a much more general way, once you've learned another language, you start to become more aware of what to look out for in another language. So you start to become more aware of grammar and syntax differences, phonetic differences, certain high-frequency vocabulary that you should learn first. Now, I'm pretty confident at this stage that if I wanted to learn a language like Mongolian or Thai or something that I have no idea about, something that is totally different to anything I've ever learned before, I would still be able to jump straight in and I would know what to look for. I would have a head start on someone who is a monolingual person who has never learned a foreign language before. I would have a head start because I've developed I've developed strategies, and B, I'm just experienced at knowing what to look for. I know what is going to get me to where I need to be the fastest, through experience. And really the reason for this, the reason why this does get easier through experience, and why your third and fourth and fifth languages get easier and easier and easier, is really because you start to learn more about yourself. You start to become more aware of yourself. Languages, like any other kind of pursuit, reveal more about our own selves. And this in turn helps us to grow and become more mature. So, when I first started out with my first foreign language back when I was a teenager, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was completely reliant on my teacher to guide me and instruct me. I really didn't know what to do. I wouldn't have known what the next step is. I had to get someone else to say, okay, this is what you do. Let's try it this way. Let's go this way. I couldn't do it on my own, because it was brand new to me, and it was totally new territory for me. But these days, I've learned so much about my own personality. I've learned about my own learning style. I've learned what type of learner I am. And this has all helped me to make my own personal adjustments in how I structure my studies and tackle new problems. One of the many things that I've learned about myself over the years is that I've always been a visual-spatial learner, which really greatly disadvantaged me growing up. I completely failed high school. On my leaving certificate from high school, I had a fail mark on just about every single subject, except for music, which I actually aced. Because my school grades were so bad, were so abysmal, no university would actually accept me. So I had to start out at a diploma level. I couldn't even get into a bachelor degree. And I failed the whole first year of that diploma. And despite this, I actually managed to convince the college that I was in to allow me into a bachelor level after a while. And it was only because of the low intake, and they needed to fill some spaces. And then I nearly failed all of the subjects in my first year of my bachelor degree. Now, you can probably imagine how discouraging all these bad grades were. You probably can imagine that I wanted to get out, like I thought I was a total failure. Many times I almost just gave up study altogether. I was going to just join a trade, but a few supportive people convinced me to stick with it and see it through. Long story short, years later, I was hitting A's. I was a straight A student in my master's, and I actually became one of the top achievers in my university, and I was awarded for that. Now, the reason why I mention my failed grades like this is because, like so many other people, I'm a visual-spatial learner, and I had to discover this through lots of trial and error, and then work out how to use it to my advantage in learning. And eventually I was able to structure my own self-learning in a way that was hugely advantageous to my own studies. Now, a visual-spatial learner struggles immensely with syllabi and structured courses. Okay, I struggle so much with structure. The majority of people who are not visual-spatial, but rather sequential learners, actually prefer to sit down and follow through a course book from first chapter through to the final chapter with a teacher directing them. Most people like this. Most people learn like this, and they don't have a problem with it. And they also learn well with audio material. They generally take note of the minor details and work through problems in a sequential way to arrive at the answer. But people like myself, visual spatial learners like myself, can't do that, or they find it very, very difficult to work like this. And although I have sat down and actually worked through books from start to finish like this, I really detest this way of learning, and I prefer to skip over the details of for the whole answer immediately, and then I work it out my own way. So in school and then college, I would often arrive at an understanding of a particular concept or the answer, but I would work it out in a way that I could never explain properly. And this is one of the reasons why visual spatial learners tend to be regarded as having a learning disorder. I remember back in college when I was working on an exegetical project, which is basically a translation project in Hebrew on an ancient Hebrew scripture, and I was doing it with a friend in college, and he was a sequential learner, so he was of the majority. So we were completely different. Now I quickly came up with a solution to the problem. It was a translation problem we had to come up with. I immediately came up with this solution. But being a visual spatial learner, I couldn't explain how I actually got there. I couldn't explain my reasoning. And he worked out, now my friend actually took longer than I did. He worked out a less innovative solution to the problem, but he actually got the high mark. He received a higher mark than I did, and I got a low mark even though my answer was better. The problem was I couldn't explain how I got to I couldn't explain how I got to my answer. I struggled, like other visual spatial learners, to explain how I found my answer, and this caused major problems for me in exams when I was trying to recall minor details and facts. And my mother used to always tell me that as a young kid, when I was a little kid, and I know a lot of kids, all kids do this, but I would destroy things. Like I would destroy radios, I would destroy electronic things and mechanical things because I wanted to get to the source of how it worked. And she said, I would break things intentionally because I wanted to see how the things actually fit together to work as a whole. And this was something that I actually discovered that is a common trait with visual spatial children, is that they will destroy things not because they're just kids and want to break stuff, but they destroy things because they want to find out why it does what it does. They want to find out how it works. Now, my approach to study today is the same. I will start with a conclusion or a complete concept, and I will break it to pieces. I will break it down and disassemble it, and then I'll piece it back together. And that's how I figure stuff out. That's how I come to conclusions in study. Now, it wasn't actually until I took up Greek and Hebrew in college that things began to change for me. This is when I actually figured this out. I discovered that being a visual spatial learner could actually be advantageous, especially when it came to memorization. Now, when I was studying Greek, I started to visualize everything that I learned. It was like I imagined I had like a glass screen in front of me with words and pictures on it, and languages became a truly visual experience for me. Like I struggle to recall things that I hear, but if I actually see it, or if I see a representation of it, it sticks. So I would actually write it up on an imaginary glass wall in my mind, and this would actually help me to remember everything that I was learning. And I aced Greek and Hebrew. I remember one thing I used to do was I would take a Greek word, say the Greek word dendron, which is for tree, and I would listen to the word, and then I would actually look at a tree while I was saying it. I would visualize what I was saying, what I was reading and saying, reading and hearing rather. So it became a very visual activity for me. So I started to apply this to many other subjects and I started getting good grades. What also helped me was that most of my subjects were offered in either English, Greek, or Hebrew. So I would choose the Greek and Hebrew, which meant that I could continue to apply and use my languages in all of my subjects. Now, when writing an essay, I would write my conclusion out first, and then I would work backwards, disassembling the idea that I had with lots of brain mapping diagrams on paper and visual aids, and then I would piece it all back together coherently. I would arrive at a conclusion very early on, as visual-spatial learners usually tend to do, and then I would work in reverse. So I'd make changes to my conclusion as I went along. Now, it's not a very orthodox way to write and argue in academic papers, but the good results and newly discovered passion for learning are all that matter at the end of the day. So just a few other adjustments that I made to my language learning strategy as a visual-spatial learner. One is that I don't bother with step-by-step coursework anymore. I don't ever do it. It's not good for me. It doesn't work for me as a visual-spatial learner. I no longer work through step-by-step coursework. I ensure that all audio material that I use is accompanied by something visual, transcripts or images, always. I guide my language teachers to teach me the areas that I know I need. I don't rely on them for structure. I jump straight into complex, natural language material. Even if I don't understand anything and I work backwards from that, breaking it down over time. I completely avoid rote memorization, which is useless to me, and I use flashcards with whole sentences, phrases, and pictures instead of single words. Now, the majority of people who are listening to this are probably sequential learners, normal learners. Generally speaking, and I know that many things exist on a spectrum, so it's not all black and white with everybody. But generally speaking, you will work best with structured material. If you're a sequential learner, you will work best with structured material. In other words, step 1, step 2, step 3. If you find that a language course book and an experienced teacher steering you in a set direction actually helps you, then stick with it. That's your strength. Now, I would be really interested to hear if anyone listening to this is a visual-spatial learner. If you feel like you are, go on to my website, mezzoguild.com/contact, and send me an email and tell me what you think. Tell me what your experience has been, and if you are a visual-spatial learner, how have you overcome that? What strategies have you used to, whether it's languages or anything else, how do you learn effectively being a visual-spatial learner? If you find this interesting, make sure to subscribe, make sure to share, and I'll talk to you soon.